The kinetic round shattered the crystalline pillar inches from her head, showering her iridescent skin in glass needles. Jax didn't think. He couldn't afford to. He lunged, his massive, scarred hand closing tight around the glowing cranial crest at the center of Kaylin's brow, to yank her into the shadow of the bulkhead. A touch meant for salvation felt like a transgression of the soul. Kaylin's entire body seized, her breath hitching in a sound that wasn't a scream, but a ragged, melodic gasp. The gold-white radiance of her crest flared, blindingly bright, sending a rhythmic pulse through Jax's palm that bypassed his nerves and anchored itself directly in his chest. For Aveyron, the crest was sacred. It was the seat of their lineage, a sensory organ never touched by another unless they were merging their lives permanently. To Jax, a veteran who had spent 15 years in the mud of the border worlds, it had just been a handle. The spire of Uthelgard was screaming. High above the clouds of the capital, the elegant floating sanctuary was being torn apart by the very guards meant to protect it. Smoke, thick and gray, choked the corridors where silence and prayer usually lived. Jax hauled Kaylin up, his boots slipping on the polished marble floors now slick with coolant and blood. He didn't let go of her arm, but the damage was done. The bond had snapped into place, a phantom heat humming between them that made the air feel too thin to breathe. He had been hired to keep her breathing, not to rewrite the laws of her lineage. But as another volley of plasma fire melted the tapestries behind them, the weight of the High Sovereign's daughter felt different. She wasn't just a client anymore. She was a physical ache in his own mind. It turned out that luck was a finite resource in the spire. They reached the hangar levels just as the primary stabilizers took a direct hit. The world tilted. Kaylin stumbled, her silk robes snagging on a jagged piece of fallen hull plating. She looked at him then, her eyes wide, the pupils dilated until the amber gold was almost swallowed by black. "You touched it," she whispered, her voice trembling over the roar of the collapsing ceiling. "Jax, the resonance. I can feel your pulse." "Focus on the ship, Princess," he growled, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He kicked a debris pile aside, clearing a path to the last remaining long-range interceptor. "We're trading the grace of the spire for the grit of the trenches. If we stay here, we're dead. If we leave, we're heretics. Choose." She didn't hesitate. She grabbed his combat vest, her fingers digging into the reinforced plating. Her crest pulsed with a radiance that matched the fire of the front line. "Take me away," she commanded. The flight to the fringe world of Krios was a blur of red warnings and the screaming protest of an overtaxed engine. They hit the atmosphere of the desert moon hard. The interceptor skipped across the dunes like a stone on water, eventually burying its nose in a canyon of rust-colored rock. When the dust settled, the silence of the wasteland was deafening. Jax pried the canopy open, the dry, biting wind of Krios rushing in to replace the recycled air. He climbed out, reaching back to help Kaylin. As their hands met, the connection flared again, an electric, terrifying intimacy that made the vast desert feel small. Truth is, the hunters were already coming. They had the signature of the ship. They had the mandate of the coup. And Kaylin, who had spent her life surrounded by poets and priests, looked at the barren, lethal horizon with a hollow kind of terror. "They will find us," she said, her voice small against the wind. Jax checked the charge on his pulse rifle and looked at her. Really looked at her. "Then we stop being prey," he said. "I'm going to teach you how to break the rhythm. We're going to turn this dirt into a graveyard." The transition from the velvet halls of the spire to the jagged obsidian of the Krios canyons was a physical shock. Jax didn't give her time to mourn. He stripped her of her luminous robes, replaced them with scuffed tactical plating, and handed her a vibro blade. Truth is, the traditional Veyron combat arts were a dance of predictable, elegant arcs, beautiful to look at but useless against a professional hit squad with thermal optics. He taught her to move through the shadows of the rust-colored rock, to wait for the heartbeat between the enemy's scans. He taught her that survival had a price, and it was usually paid in sweat and the raw stinging of sand-scoured skin. "They're here," Jax whispered, his voice barely a vibration against the canyon wall. Two dropships hissed overhead, their searchlights cutting through the twilight like cold blue eyes. The elite Veyron hunters landed with predatory precision. They expected a frightened princess. They didn't expect the ghost in the dust. Kaylin crouched beside Jax, her breath shallow. The bond between them, that involuntary, soul-deep tether, was no longer a distraction. It was a tactical feed. She could feel the icy calm of his focus, the way his muscles coiled like a spring. When he moved, she moved. There was no need for words. As the first hunter entered the narrow gorge, Jax didn't engage with a standard frontal assault. He triggered a localized rock slide, a chaotic, improvised distraction that broke the rhythm of the elite squad's formation. In the confusion, Kaylin blurred forward. She didn't use the graceful high guard of her ancestors. She stayed low, sliding through the grit, her blade finding the gap in the hunter's neck seal with a brutal, practiced efficiency. The fight was a blur of impact and heat. Jax was a mountain of iron, absorbing hits that would have shattered a lesser man, his rifle barking in the confined space. He watched her back, and she watched his, their movements synchronized by the resonance humming in their blood. When the last hunter fell, the silence that returned to the canyon was different. It wasn't the silence of hiding. It was the silence of ownership. Kaylin stood over the fallen commander, her crest glowing with a fierce, steady light that outshone the rising moon. She wasn't just a refugee anymore. She was a survivor who had learned that the old laws were brittle. "They will send more," Jax said, wiping a smear of dark blood from his cheek. He looked at her, his gaze lingering on the crest he had once accidentally claimed. The tension in the gap between them had shifted from a transgression to a promise. "Let them," Kaylin replied, her voice ringing with the iron she had found in the desert. "We aren't going back to the spire to beg for a place. We're going back to change it." Ironically, the High Sovereign didn't execute them when they returned to the capital months later. Flanked by a loyalist cell they had forged in the fringe, the side of the luminal heir, scarred and hardened, standing in a sacred union with a low-born guardian, was a tactical reality the throne couldn't ignore. Their bond was a strategic evolution, a bridge between the ancient, rigid grace of the Veyron and the adaptive, relentless spirit of the frontier. He didn't just save her life, he had rewritten the laws of her lineage, and in the quiet of the reclaimed throne room, as her hand found his, the universe finally felt like it was exactly where it was meant to be.